This is an RNZ podcast.
Hello, Media Watchers. Hayden Donnell. We haven't seen each other since the new year, have we?
No, we haven't seen each other since long before Christmas, in fact. You went gallivanting away across the South Island and left us here on our own to finish up the year with some awards.
That's true. I wasn't
Maggie
here for
Tweedy.
I wasn't here for the Media Watch Awards, which I was genuinely vexed about that.
I have noticed that you have been really down in the dumps about that.
I have been down in the dumps about that. But hey, plenty of media news over the summer. And we are beginning tonight's Midweek Media Watch by talking about some of it. These job cuts at NZME. Remind people, if you could, what is happening here and what your information is as to how these changes might be implemented.
So just the basic facts, 40 jobs or so to go. Most of those roles are coming from what we call in the new media environment production, but in the old days you and I would have called sub-editors. Mm-hmm. And of course, any journalist will tell you that sub-editors are the unsung heroes of the newsroom. So there's a lot
scary.
Very scary, but also they will save your life.
Oh, yeah.
And there's some really good ones. I've almost wanted to profile Rod Pascoe, who's one of the most amazing and senior and long-standing sub-editors in New Zealand journalism. Can I tell a story?
Yeah,
maybe I shouldn't say this. I don't know. But when he retired, oh God!
Should we get a sub editor to look over this first?
Look, we need a sub in here.
Now go on.
When he retired, I knew he would still spot mistakes in the Herald, and they hadn't locked him out of the CMS, so he'd go in and he'd keep fixing grammatical. That's how committed these people are. Anyway, they are going to be much missed by the journalists. But there are also some of the sung heroes that are being caught up in this, and that's the journalists themselves, and some of the people that might be affected by these cuts are pretty senior. So to give you an idea of the nature of this restructure, in the editorial section, journalist roles are being reduced from, I think, 22 to 18 or so. But in that restructured system, there's only 7 senior roles, and it seems like existing senior staff will have to compete for those roles or apply for those roles. So all the roles are being disestablished and these new roles are being created, and then the existing staff have to apply for them. And there's some of the people that are caught up in that, big names that you might subscribe to the paper for. I'm not saying these people are losing their jobs, but just to give you an idea who they are, like Jared Savage, David Fisher, Carolyn Meng-Yi, Katie Harris, Nick Jones. These are award-winning journos, and these are people. They're not like vainglorious showboaters like you or I, Emil. These are real credible people, and so. And even if they are successful, apparently, in getting one of these senior roles, it might not come with the same amount of resources invested into it or editorial independence. You'll be under a boss.
And a lot of the investigative reporting that many of these people do takes a lot of time, and you need to have the freedom to go down corridors that might not lead anywhere, but that might help you with the wider story.
Yeah, and this is not set in stone or anything now, but what I understand is that in the contracts, or in some of the contracts now, there are explicit mentions that you will get the time and the resources that you need to go down those corridors, as you say, and that might not be the case in the future. So there's a few different implications that are coming out of this for the future of investigative journalism at NZME.
Impending job cuts never tend to go down well at places of employment, so I'm guessing that this has not gone especially well in the NZME newsroom.
No, I mean, one comment that I did hear is that they don't know how they're going to run a newsroom. But these things are never met well, as you say. But there's a particular note of disquiet around this one because one of the editorial bosses, not the only one that seems to be driving it or behind it, is Sarah Bristow. She's Newshub's former news director, recently brought in to head video and audio at NZME. She's involved in this restructure, and from what I can tell, maybe some of the NZME staff are chafing at someone who was so heavily involved in another business that failed, coming in to tell them how to restructure their business so it doesn't fail. But you've also had some former Newshub staff coming into NZME recently. The most notable one is a great journalist, and this is not, I think everyone would welcome him there, but notably Michael Morrow, who has been brought into NZME with obviously some esteem attached to him and probably a bit of money, and he doesn't appear to be at risk. So there's some more people that have been there longer, and they're seeing people that are outside kind of coming in and restructuring potentially their jobs.
I guess this is an inevitability of kind of an amalgamation of journalistic talent as big companies go out of business, as we saw last year. But I mean, do you get the sense that there is internal resentment at like an outside takeover kind of situation?
Yeah, I don't think it would go that far, but these are people that have served at NZME for many years. They've kept it afloat through tough times, including COVID, of course. Mm-hmm. They may lose their jobs, and then they're seeing these people that were, in fact, involved in another business that didn't stay afloat. They're keeping their jobs, and there's some disquiet about that and maybe a sense of unfairness there.
And I mean, we mentioned this earlier on, but it's probably worth hammering home the point that investigative journalism, people always talk about this, investigative journalism being of course, a cornerstone of what journalism has to offer society. We want to see more investigative journalism, really hard-nosed stories, speaking truth to power and so on and so forth. And it looks like we could be losing some serious talent in that area.
Yeah, the Herald has been really excellent in fostering that kind of investigative talent. If you read the paper on a Saturday, you'll get big, long reads from really good journalists, and they've paid for that, but it doesn't seem like they can keep on paying, or they don't feel like they can keep on paying for all of that. And I'm sure you will still get big investigations and great journalism out of there. I'm not saying that's going to end, but it does seem like that might take a hit here. And that's a real shame, because that's the big thing that we're losing. It's getting eroded everywhere. We've lost Sunday, we've lost Fair Go, we've lost all of News Hub, we've lost all of these people. And so now it's another bit of it that's taking a hit. And there's great things that are popping up on Substack, but it's not quite filling the gap.
And speaking of that investigative journalism, we saw the value of that over the summer, didn't we, in mid-January, with a story from the Herald about the Golriz Garraman shoplifting saga.
Yeah, I thought this was interesting because it's the story beneath the story, the digging beneath the story to find something more interesting going on. So the first, obviously, people have probably already read or heard about it, but stuff reported on January 16 that police were investigating a shoplifting allegation involving former Green MP Golriz Garraman. Now, so far, disappointing, sad, whatever you want to say it. The story was pretty light on detail, and as more facts came to light, some interesting stuff emerged. For one thing, we found out that the store itself didn't make a complaint, and then we found out that Garraman hadn't actually taken anything out of the store. So the question then is, how did this complaint make it to the police? And then how did it make it to, well, the first people that kind of hinted at it or talked about it were the blogger Mark Spring and Leo Malloy, the former mayoral candidate in Auckland. And then how did it make it from them to the media? And thankfully the Herald's investigative reporter David Fisher was on that case.
And what did he reveal?
So long story short, but that it seems that the Aura system, or police use the Aura system to look up Golriz Garraman, and that system logs details about everyone entering a store, and then store staff can go through it and flag anything they think is suspicious. And Fisher found that Aura is able to be searched by police even when no complaint is made. So the staff maybe logged this incident, but then they didn't actively make a complaint to police and say this is something that's worth investigating. They can still actually go into it and look at it and find stuff, in this case, potentially to add to their case or to their information about Garraman, because she was taking an appeal against her initial convictions for shoplifting from a retail store in Auckland. Now, this raises some privacy concerns. I mean, there's the fact that our faces and details and location are accessible to police even when no one has actually complained to them directly about our behaviour.
It's a remarkably powerful system.
Yes, it's a huge amount of power to have. And not only that, but if they do have that power, if store managers have that power, because it seems like some of this work is being outsourced to store managers who don't have the same checks and balances. Now, shouldn't it be more secure? Because now this information has gone out to a relatively fringe blogger, to Leo Malloy, then it's gone on to the media, and something like that could have real reputational impacts. It could be a reputation killer, particularly for a public figure like Golriz Ghahraman. And given that, you'd have to wonder whether there are enough checks and balances in place. And that's really what Fisher's story is going into.
And this was one of those cases, in a sense, wasn't it, where the story behind the story shed crucial light on the story itself.
Yeah, exactly. And was probably more important than the story itself, because the real question is how this got to the media. Now, Fisher has kept following this. He published a news story in the Herald today. In it, Ghahraman gives a statement calling the police weird and obsessed, okay, but police did concede that they should have called the incident alleged shoplifting in an initial statement they gave to the media about it. And just as a note as well, they have dropped any they have said that they're not going to charge Golriz Ghahraman over this incident, which I think a lawyer, I think it was Graham Edgeler, did say that they find pretty difficult given she didn't actually take the stuff out of the shop, which is generally a pretty key component in shoplifting.
To bring this back to the newsroom cuts at NZME, those cuts are happening because of the financial difficulties that media companies face. This is a well-publicised thing, and I'm sure that we'll hear more about it later and throughout this year. But is there actually any hope on the horizon for these reporters and the media companies that employ them on a financial level?
Well, do you remember this name? The Fair Digital News Bargaining Bill. That was meant to be the hope, and it was off the table, then it was back on the table, and now it's officially been put on hold. So Broadcasting Minister Paul Goldsmith, he wasn't exactly bullish about its prospects when he went on Heather du Plessis-Ellen's show on News Talk ZB last year.
I mean, the most important thing we can do for commercial media right now is get the economy growing so people can spend more on advertising and actually make some money. But the broader issue of how you corral, it's one of the biggest companies in the world, and have a conversation around how that works is not straightforward, and I'm working my way through it. But when I've got something to announce, you'll be the first to know.
Now, that biggest company in the world he's talking about was Google there. How do you get it to pay for news? That has been a bit of a vexed issue, as it turns out, and I'm not sure New Zealand will solve it, so Paul Goldsmith has got the odds stacked against him there. But a month ago, he told the Herald's media insider Shane Curry that he's waiting on some changes that Australia might be making to its legislation, which we based our legislation off, and then he might follow them to see if that is going to work. So it looks like, if you're talking about hope on the horizon is pretty distant. You're squinting into the distance. And in the meantime, you've got people like David Fisher showing the value of investigative journalism, which is really the thing that's under threat. And anyone can print off a police media release, but it takes someone like David Fisher, and I'm really sorry about this, Emil, but to spot something fishy going on.
You're better than that. You're better than that, and you know that you are.
New year, new me. This is what I do now.
If we Hayden, if we bring this back to the Golriz Ghahraman story and look at that, well, I suppose with the benefit of hindsight, what do you think about the initial decision to publish that story? Like, I remember when it popped up on my phone, reading it for the first time, and my jaw dropped. I was like, oh no, really? Knowing what we know now, what do you make of that decision to publish that story?
And I'm sort of speaking off the cuff here, but the gap between that reaction, because I had the same one, and then the facts of the case is sort of what makes it feel pretty iffy, because it wasn't actually as serious as it seemed to be. I can absolutely see why media outlets would have published what they did. They had a statement from police. Now, if they'd just gone off the social media rumours and a blogger publishing something a bit vague, I would be more scathing. Now, they had a statement from police acknowledging that they're investigating Ghahraman for shoplifting. They saw that as an update on a major story from last year. But I do think there were a few factors here that should have given them pause, right? The person at its centre is no longer an MP. So there's not that same public interest there. This is a person with power. This is just a private citizen. She has publicly acknowledged she's struggled with her mental health. So there's that you kind of have to take into consideration as well. But you also didn't know what had happened. And maybe a few questions should have been asked. We knew that the store hadn't placed a complaint, from what I understand. Should more questions have been asked of the exact nature of what happened here, that she didn't actually remove any goods from the store? And should there have been a bit more skepticism around it, given some of the people involved, like Leo Malloy, aren't exactly politically neutral? I think that at least the David Fisher approach might have been more beneficial here. And on that note, it is worth noting that One News, from what I can see, hasn't published a story on this topic.
I guess the elephant in the room is that a lot of people are going to click on that story.
Yeah. Absolutely. And when you get that statement from police, like police statements, this is probably pretty problematic sometimes, but they just tend to go through. That's an authority source that the media just trusts. And once you get that, and you've seen your competitors do it more pertinently, because Stuff put out Garriman's name before the Herald, I think, and there was probably some pressure there. There would have been internal pressure within that the Herald that the competitors got it and we haven't, so that kind of all generates it.
Was the editorial decision questioned, to your knowledge, by members of the public?
Well, I know that Stuff did receive some complaints, and one of its leaders issued a pretty spiky response. It was pretty eye-opening to someone complaining about Stuff's coverage, and she accused the complainant of creating the kind of media mistrust that ushered in Donald Trump. Far out. So that's pretty extreme. She said, this is Tracy Watkins, the editor of The Post. She said to this complainant, this is how Donald Trump was able to become so devastatingly effective as a politician. I hope you are able to examine your complaint in that light and reflect on whether you are doing journalism a disservice. To me, that's a little bit of an overreaction, I'd have to say. For one thing, as far as I can tell, the complainant said that the story breached editorial standards, questioned whether it was newsworthy. I'm not sure. I haven't seen their complaint, I will say that, but I'm not, from what I understand, it wasn't that it was false news or fake news, just that it was not worthy news. Now, there were also far more legitimate questions. This isn't just a fact that you're debating here. This is whether this story could potentially have harmed a person who's admitted they're vulnerable for perhaps not actually really justifiable reason. And I do wonder as well whether that response from Watkins actually minimised the role of an editor, because she said, well, you've just confused fact and opinion here. This was a factual story, and there's no... just because you don't like the facts at play, you shouldn't complain about it. Now, the media isn't just about publishing stories that are factual. It's also about making editorial judgments between what to publish, what not to publish. And look, that might sound a little bit sinister, but that is the nature of the job of an editor. You are making commonplace editorial judgments about what's worthy or not.
Can you maybe just quickly elaborate a little bit on the role of an editor? What does an editor at a big newspaper actually do?
Well, I mean, if you think about the Media Council standards, it's reporting stuff in a fair and balanced way, a responsible way, but also, this is interesting. I saw a piece from Joel McManus that I keep referencing. He was talking about how he really regretted just ragging on the Wellington without an eye sign on the waterfront down there. It's actually a one-way success, but when he was a reporter at the Post, he ragged on it just reflexively at the time. And he said, look, every one of these stories is an opportunity to actually, and I might sound hopelessly naive here, but to widen the public discourse, to shed light on stuff, to actually improve society in some way sometimes, and maybe not just reflexive negativity, actually really contemplating the value of what you're reporting, what it's doing, what it's actually adding to society, whether it's holding people to account, whether it's actually doing good. Maybe that is part of the job as well. And I mean, I know that also goes hand in hand with the absolute imperative to make money. And sometimes those things are in conflict and it's difficult.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess one element of these NZME cuts that this does bring up is the question of whether the media is publishing too many stories, whether too much content is getting out there.
Yeah, that was the stat that I think I brought up from Joel on Morning Report, that apparently Stuff publishes more stories per day than the New York Times.
Right.
Which does seem like a bit much, because the New York Times is covering the entirety of America and we only have 5 million people. This has been a long-standing thing. Apparently at the Herald, one of the reasons why they're doing these cuts is they say we're publishing 18,000 stories in the last 6 months and 12,000 of them generated 97% of the traffic.
Right.
So there's long been this argument from editors that we're doing too much, but they're the ones in charge of actually assigning people the tasks, deciding what gets published, making those editorial calls. And yes, maybe there is an imperative that we should be going for quality over quantity, but that hasn't necessarily been the clarion cry from the top.
Maybe easier said than done when you've got the numbers and the balance sheet in front of you as well. But,
yeah, and honestly, when you're in a newsroom, there's time pressures, right? It's hard to get that bird's eye view because stuff is being flung at you all the time. And it's hard to get a bird's eye view and think, what is the absolute, what are we doing for the next 6 months? What is our top priorities? And that strategy hasn't always been there in my experience.
We got about 4.5 minutes left. What should we end with, Hayden? Should we talk about Anna Wilding?
Well, I feel like you need to adjudicate at least one award. Okay. You didn't get to do any awards. I really want to give you an award to adjudicate because I know that it has been getting you down. So
it has, it's true.
What about the award for media manipulation of the year?
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
And this was
for the context here. At the end of last year, Hayden and Colin did some Midweek Mediawatch awards for the end of the year. I wasn't there that day. I was off doing the Milford track, and I was very sad about it. And Hayden very kindly is giving me an award now to adjudicate.
You know what? I reckon most flagrant misinformation is better. Yeah? No? Yeah? No? Yeah, flagrant misinformation, because this one is one of my favorites. This is Colin's pick. He is very angry at News Talk ZB because it keeps airing callers claiming it's legal for men to pee on their own car in public. This is the latest example from back in May.
There was a law passed in the 1900s where a gentleman can pee legally on the front left-hand tyre of his car. As long as it's on his car, he was fine.
Absolutely untrue. Keep airing them. But there was a picture on the front page of the press of a man that was peeing on the front tyre of his car. It made the Media Insider's column over at the Herald.
It did, yes, I remember.
Yeah, if you remember that. So this misinformation is going far and wide. And for me, maybe it's the freak out in conservative media over the Olympic gold winning boxer Imane Khalif, who is variously accused of being a man, a guy, or in the words of Fox News' Janine Pirro, a so-called person. She might be a so-called person, but she was assigned female at birth, always competed as a woman now. That was one of the weird freakouts. Also, this is a bit niche, but it gets my goat. The Post reporting that Wellington City Council ploughed $42 million or $518 per household into cycleways over the last 2 years. Now, that left out NZTA's portion of the funding. The actual cost would be $319 per household ploughed into cycleways if you actually took out NZTA's portion of the funding, which is from the nationwide pot, which doesn't come from Wellington households, but all households. Now, the story also left out some context that by the same measure, we're ploughing $1,587. That's $1,587 per household for roads and $3,802 for total transport by the same measure. And that's going to go down quite a lot in 3 years when the capital works are completed on those cycleways.
All right. That is pretty niche, Hayden. That one is pretty niche.
Yeah, is it going to be peeing on the car?
It's no. I feel like the peeing on the car one is more understandable because perhaps it's the one that it's one that people kind of want to be true because it's funny.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But people are going to be peeing on their cars left, right and centre.
Well, will they though?
Just because they want it to be true.
Nah, just because you can doesn't mean that
it must be happening far enough that the press has put it on their front page.
No, I
rare
think
event.
the Imane Khalif story, I mean, I remember when this happened, And controversy around trans and DSD athletes in sport is a live societal issue, but I feel like the glee and the fervour with which people willfully twisted and distorted and lied about this situation to suit political agendas, forgetting that there's a person at the centre of all of this.
Yes. It was really bad.
Yeah, it was really, yeah.
This is an honourable choice and probably better than the peeing on the car.
Thank you, Hayden.
Thank you, Emil.
Hayden Donnell, who will be back in a couple of weeks with another rendition of Midweek Media Watch.